Dudes, I'm so
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, boys.
This is Sungazer, a band formed in 2014 by Sean Crowder and Adam Neely in a location where many great bands have been birthed, Berklee College of Music. In the ensuing years, they've released 2 imaginative and completely self-produced EPs under the name Sungazer, establishing and exploring a musical terrain defined, in my mind at least, by open-mindedness and curiosity. They seem to always be asking the question, what if? Inspired at least in part by Adam's time studying with jazz pianist and composer Jim McNeely.
Jim McNeely, for studying with him, it was always, let's take this idea, how far can we go? How far? Keep going, keep going. You're settling here. There's so much more that we can play with this. We can play with this idea so much more. That kind of approach, a very playful approach too, very what if approach. It definitely influences everything that I kind of try and write.
After years of jamming, writing, and touring, they expanded their band to include saxophonist Jared Yee, keyboardist Christian Lee, and guitarist Shub Saran. Meanwhile, the leaders of Sungazer established successful YouTube channels, allowing them to describe and define their musical interests and intentions, and to expand their audience. On October 11th of this year, Sungazer finally released their first full-length album, Perihelion. Spoiler, it's really great. It's also something of an oddity. Within its 40 minutes of runtime, a potentially dizzying array of tangled intricacies are worked through, almost like mathematicians doing proofs just for the fun of flexing their brains.
This is great.
Esoteric? Yes. But forbidding? Absolutely not. The music on Perihelion has connected with hundreds of thousands of people, achieving a level of mainstream success that is almost unheard of in highbrow instrumental music. And yet, you won't see Sungazer in any editorial playlists on the streaming services, or in Pitchfork, or in the New York Times, or really anywhere in the press. So I called Sean and Adam to talk about these confusing contradictions and a lot more. As I've done in previous episodes of Score Study, I'm just going to let this whole conversation play out and leave my editorializing out of it. There's simply too much good information here, and I would be a dick if I left any of it out. This is Score Study with me, Brian Kroc.
News story in aisle 3. Local clerk Apu Nahasapima Petalan is a dead ringer for a dead singer. He's living the rock star dream as frontman for 80s chart toppers Sungazer on their last final Hell Refreezes Over ultimate goodbye for Sirius this time, Never Again Part 2 of Question Mark Tour.
I googled Sungazer and I found like nothing in the jazz press and nothing in the modern prog rock all of the sort of outlets that should be paying attention aren't, and yet you both have huge followings and play tours to sold out crowds at big venues. And I wonder if you could talk about that, about being an independent artist and taking control of your own destiny in that way, sort of with, disregarding the establishment.
Yeah, well, one thing that has always been kind of a question mark for me whenever I've been dealing with, promoting records or promoting your music, you want to get your music out there, is the function of PR firms and what PR people do. There's a friend of ours, Jay Soto, who's actually sang on this record, like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. She was promoting a record or an EP that she was releasing. This was the first time that I'd ever talked to anybody about their experiences with PR and what PR does. And just hearing how much money she spent on how little the PR firm actually did was very disheartening. And I've been hearing that as like the consistent theme throughout most of like my friends when they're promoting their music, whether it be jazz, whether it be in different fields like, the prog rock scene or whatever. It just being very disappointed with how much money is being spent. Whereas on social media, you don't have to spend a damn dime to get your music out to many, many people. And because of what like Sean and I do with like music theory YouTube, we don't need to do that. We don't need to get it into publications. There is this kind of like respectability gap, of course, because being in a publication or being known by the intelligentsia of certain musical communities definitely has like, carries with it a certain prestige. But at the same time, if the goal is to play music and get people to listen to it, that's not necessarily what you need to do. And because we have this very specific niche, we got this like one thing that we have and we control it. We control kind of our marketing, which is very strange, but for musicians to control the marketing wing of your music, that's how we're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
Do you see this sort of representing a broader change in the industry as a whole?
I think so.
Yeah.
Kind of, right?
Maybe. I'm not sure if I can point to anybody else who's done it exactly how we're trying to do it, but I think obviously moving away from traditional record label and PR situations is probably how the industry has been going for 10, 15 years. The thing I will say is that they still control playlisting, which is a huge thing on Spotify. You want to get on editorial playlists. Unless you have that record label support, it's almost impossible to get on that, which forms this kind of like gray area, this payola, where it's difficult to get on like playlists that are not algorithmically decided, editorially decided. But beyond that, I mean, yeah, there's a degree of like being able to do what you do without that kind of traditional power structure, even if the power structure is creeping back in.
Right.
Yeah, I do think that there is. I think that in the old days, you had to have a record label by necessity. That was the only way to get on the radio and to get into stores. And they were the gatekeepers. And now there are new gatekeepers. I guess they're the playlist curators in a sense. But with the internet, we do have a lot more power that we can take things into our own hand and get stuff out on our own, which is what Adam was speaking about that we've been doing. And the other thing with a record label is it's got to be a deal that benefits both parties. And from my point of view, it seems that it doesn't benefit the artist as much. Now, certainly there are cases where this would still be appropriate, but a lot of people may not know that to get a record deal in the first place in this day and age requires that you have a giant social media presence.
Right.
Just to get in the door. And once you have that, it's like, well, what do I need a record label?
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting scenario. I mean, I want to be careful with what I say here because I'm friends with a guy who does is a PR has a PR firm and
yeah, and if you want to edit out all the PR stuff,
I
understand. Yeah, I understand. I understand the value of it too, the value added for PR, because what PR is interfacing with another system, interfacing with the system of publications and prestige and gatekeepers, essentially, that we have kind of moved away from because we have a different set of gatekeepers, which is YouTube's machine learning and recommendation algorithm, which is how we're promoting our music and how we're working with that, which represents a barrier to entry in some ways greater than the traditional system. But because we've built up this educational kind of system for ourselves, we can use that instead in lieu of record labels and in lieu of PR firms.
It's interesting that you say that the barrier is greater, because it's, from my perspective, that's true, but it's also a lot more cut and dry. Like, there's a clear path towards sort of finding an audience on social media if you have a strategy and stuff, but you need to be willing to basically work like a dog all the time. And, it's funny because Adam and you and I went to school together at MSM, and there's one thing that Justin DeChocho said that I always think about, which was like, he said to the whole group, I guess it was like a convocation type of a thing. He was like, look to your left and look to your right. And if you're not working harder than the people you see in the room, then you're, not going to be successful. I always think about you because you've always been the hardest working motherfucker that I've known. And I think that that might be a prerequisite now for a young person trying to break into this industry, that you have to be ready to basically be hustling every waking hour of the day. And do you guys have anything to say about that?
I'll say yes and no. It's going back to the idea, or going back to social media and building a presence and building that thing online. You said it was cut and dry, and I think it is cut and dry. There is a system for developing an audience, and when the pandemic hit, I saw a lot of people attempt to make YouTube videos, or a lot of people start asking me about, okay, how do I make money online? And there were very few people who actually went through and did it. You were one of the few people who actually went through and started building something. And you learn very quickly that there is a very different approach on the social media space for creating your own distribution mechanism, your own brand, your own everything. And it's very specific, and it takes a lot of work. But what people who go through the traditional music education or traditional music circles kind of don't think about is they're thinking about gig to gig. How much do I get paid for this gig? How do I get paid for this thing? How much do I get paid for this thing? And it requires a very different shift. It requires an entrepreneurial shift of how do I invest time that eventually, hopefully, will be turned into passive income, that eventually, hopefully, will be turned into a distribution mechanism and a marketing mechanism. And that's not how musicians are taught. That's not how musicians think of themselves. Which is unfortunate, because it's more of a subsistence lifestyle and subsistence approach, because that's kind of how musicians have been slotted into the workforce as, okay, how much do I get paid for this gig? How much do I get paid for this? And so that's just a thing to reconcile. In terms of hard work, I mean, yeah, you got to work hard.
Yeah.
Sure.
And this brings up another thing I wanted to hear you guys talk about, which is that the workload is less if you have a teammate, if you have a partner. And you guys have been partners for saying partner makes it sound like
we're dating.
You guys have been collaborating closely for a really long time, and I realized when researching about you both that I don't necessarily know. I assume you met at Berklee. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about?
Yeah, we met. Yeah, we met at a jam session at Berklee. There was a jam session club. And so every once in a while we would bump into each other, probably at the Jazz Fusion jam session, or, maybe a straight ahead one or whatever. They had a bunch of different styles. So that's where we met. I guess this was 2007 or 2008, I think, somewhere around there. And then, I guess we started playing in each other's class projects, and then that led to, there was a big band that we were a part of that all the jazz composition majors would use as their kind of project band to work out arrangements. And then from there, we just started gigging. So in 2010, we moved to New York, and then we started gigging in everybody else's bands. So it was Adam and I and Elliot Klein, who's a guitarist. So we had bass, drums, and guitar in the same house. And that meant that we ended up being the backing band for all of our singer-songwriter friends, and it just kind of expanded from there.
Yeah, and it was around, I think, 2014 where we started, like, we were big fans of Mr. Barrington and Evan Marion, what he was doing with Dana Hawkins, and of course, Jojo Mayer, and a lot of these, you know, the New York electronic fusion situation, like Mark Juliana. And so in 2014, we had a little rehearsal studio in the basement, and we started like recording some ideas, and that's kind of for our own music, and that's kind of how Sungazer started. When we were at MSM, when I was at MSM, you remember Wim Leysen? He was a Belgian pianist. Yeah. And so we had a project with him, it was called Inside Outside. It was basically a project that he put together for his graduate recital. It was basically him, myself, Sean, and strings. And then we ended up kind of like making it more of a trio, and we released an album, which was kind of like the proto Sungazer. It's available on Bandcamp. But yeah, that's kind of how we started Sungazer, is like through that pipeline.
And this kind of goes back to the overarching idea in my head about you guys of being outsiders, because from my memory, I remember Inside Outside, and I remember from my memory, you guys were doing something at that time that was not at all like common, at least in the context of school, which was like incorporating all the influences that you still are mining today from like EDM and glitch and like video game music or whatever, and I didn't see anybody else really doing that, but nowadays I feel like it's so pervasive amongst younger people, and I wonder what you guys think about that.
I mean,
well,
yeah.
you talk about being an outsider. That was definitely an environment where I felt that, the vibing was pretty intense at times. A lot of cool people there, yourself included. But, I would come in, and I had been through Berklee and done, the straight ahead thing there to a degree. But showing up at MSM, we would do these recitals, and the drum kit is tuned to the stratosphere, the jazz tuning. I would pull off the giant furry beater that the last guy had and put my double kick pedal on. It's like, oh boy, I am really not the insider here, that's for sure. But it's funny that you mentioned, that word outsider, because in some sense, I have felt that artistically or stylistically, at the very least, being someone who is, on one hand, very interested in jazz and has spent a lot of time practicing and studying and playing it. But at a certain point, I also realized this is not going to be my main thing. And there are some people that are way more into that are going to take that a lot further. So going to let them do that. So I have, a certain amount of competency in jazz, but it's not my specialty. Same thing on the flip side. I also played in a progressive metal band, because I'm into that stuff as well. But I'm also not the guy that's going to sit and practice, double bass for 12 hours a day, because that's what it takes to maintain that speed. I've got other things to do. So,
right.
I was like too rock for the jazz guys and too jazz for the rock guys.
Right.
And it's kind of funny and ironic that Sungazer is now kind of in this nebulous space where we're like, what style of music is this? It's always a discussion every time we have to answer that question. Like, I don't really know what genre it is. It's just the music that we like, and that's just what it is.
And it's and that genre thing has come up in some very practical ways, like what kinds of festivals are we going to be booking for 2022? What kinds of bands are we going to be playing with? And what's been very interesting to see the response to Perihelion. The response has been mainly from the prog metal community and from people in there, mainly because we got to work with Simon Grove, who's a fantastic mix engineer and bass player for Pliny and many others. And because he's like very deep in that scene and he worked on the record, that's then how the response has kind of gone organically. No word from the jazz community, no word from anybody else out there, except for the meme young community, which has been built around the YouTube channels.
Yeah.
So it's been very interesting to see like how genre and how our musical interests and styles and training have then gone out into the marketplace.
Right.
But yeah, it's been odd.
Because for me, listening to Perihelion, I was going down this sort of spiraling path of like everything resonated with me, like the touchstones of your influences. And I was wondering, is that because we are the same age and we sort of had the same influences growing up? Or is it because we influence one another, or it's probably both things? But like, for example, Sean, I was just watching your Dream Theater video, and I know you studied with Mangini. And by the way, isn't it interesting that Dream Theater met at a jam at Berkeley, and now Sungazer is the next in
Carrying
line.
on the torch, yeah, I guess.
But like I grew up loving progressive metal, and that never seemed to have a place within jazz. And I feel like the music that I write is odd because it inevitably has to incorporate those influences, but yet like you're doing it too. And I think there are a lot of people our age who sort of have Olli Hirvonen, the guitar player in Big Heart Machine, is a similar example. When we first met, we were like, oh, you grew up listening to Steve Vai and like, or for example, Sean, like your drumming on this record really reminds me of Gavin Harrison, who I think is another drummer who doesn't fit perfectly in a world, who is too jazz for metal. And so right. Could you maybe speak a little about that, about the pool of influences and where you're both coming from artistically?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a thing that at this point in my life, I don't really think about. It's just, that's what comes out. But of course, there's a deep history of a lot of stuff going back. So, I started playing music in school mostly, and my dad had a drum set in the basement. So I kind of went through the school system, learning all the different styles. And in my free time, I would just play along to the rock songs on the radio, like alternative rock. That's like what was popular. So I would just play along to that. And then, at some point I got into jazz through the big band, swing kind of stuff at my high school, and then going to Berkeley. And, for a long time, my focus as a drummer was just to become a working drummer. And I wasn't thinking at all about making artistic statements or developing my own style. Like that wasn't important to me. It was more important that I develop the craft and be able to play anything. Because I thought that's what I needed in order to work as a musician. And so as a byproduct of that, I ended up getting into all these styles of music. And so, at a certain point, I got into the fusion drummers. I mean, guys like Dennis Chambers. Dennis is probably my biggest influence, one of the biggest. Vinnie Colaiuta, of course. Virgil Donati, studying with Mike Mangini. I mean, all of that stuff had a massive influence on me. And then once we got to New York, then it was all the kind of hip electronic jazz guys like Mark Juliana and Zach Danziger, and all of that kind of comes together in this mysterious soup that you can't really explain. When you're in the moment playing music, it comes out. But of course, it's a sum of all of the stuff that I've listened to. And of course, I didn't really mention the jazz guys, but there was a serious period at Berklee too, getting into Elvin and Tony and all those guys as well. So
Right.
it's just a big mix.
And Adam, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about McNeely.
McNeely.
I feel like people need to know, about.
Yeah.
So because when I hear in your guys' music things that are resonating with me, a lot of times they're reminding me that it makes me think. I wonder if it's if some of the sort of like fluidity with ideas and like taking extreme risks with your music. I wonder if McNeely was an influence there for you, Adam.
Yeah. So, we studied with Jim McNeely at MSM, and it was when, I first came to New York, had very similar influences to Sean with like the metal and then alternative music and jazz and fusion. And we came to New York and then discovered electronic music, and dubstep had just first started being a big thing with Bro Step. And I remember Sean showing me, like, I think his sister had sent him a dubstep track or something. It's like, I was like, yo, check this out. And it was the trashiest thing. And we were both listening to it like, this is amazing. So I was like, I got to try and do this with big band. And I remember bringing some of this stuff into McNeely, and he's like, oh, okay, this is cool. Like, how far can we take it? And that was an interesting thing, because for Jim McNeely, for studying with him, it was always, let's take this idea, how far can we go? How far? Keep going. You're settling here. There's so much more that we can play with this. We can play with this idea so much more. And that it's not maximalism, but that kind of approach, a very playful approach too, very what if approach. It definitely influences everything that I kind of try and write. Sungazer is interesting because Sungazer is like, it's a small ensemble, it's a small group thing, but because we spend so much time programming synths and programming layers and going like that, they're at the core, they're simple songs, simple grooves, but then there's a bunch of layers on top that we play with. And definitely, it's impossible not to be deeply influenced by Jim McNeely, especially if you've, if you've studied with him and worked with him. What he does to your sense of wonder and does to your sense of scale.
Right.
Like what can be done is pretty awesome.
Yeah. I'm glad that you started to bring up the recording process, because that was another thing I'm really curious about, is just how you guys, so Sean, you're in Berlin at the moment. Adam, you're in Queens, I would have.
Brooklyn. We're in Brooklyn,
oh,
baby. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you moved. I knew that. But what's your address? No, I'm just kidding. So I want to know about how you wrote these songs. And if I had a hunch, I would kind of guess that maybe Sean initiated a lot of these ideas, because this record is like, if there's a thesis of this record, it's like rhythmic. It's rhythmic. It's rhythm and grooves. It seems like the songs are built upon those grooves. Am I right in assuming that, or?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the songs are. So historically, Sungazer started as a project where I went into the studio, which was our basement in the apartment, and I recorded a bunch of improvisations. Not just like a free-form drum solo, but I improvised a song form, kind of an A section, a B section, A section, B section, bridge, whatever. And then Adam would go afterwards and write music on top of it. And that is how this record came together largely, although I will say on this one, I think it was a bit more collaborative in the sense that Adam started quite a few of the ideas as well. I'm not sure, I haven't counted them, but it's, probably something like half and half, ideas starting from me versus ideas starting from Adam. And once that initial idea is there, then we just start sending files back and forth and making revisions and adding sections and cutting things up and changing it until we finally get the form of the song that we like, and we have all the musicians we want on it. And then the final step was to record the drums. Although we had previously recorded the drums several times before that to get the parts exactly right. It's kind of like what the metal guys do, where they will program all the drum parts. They will compose the drum parts, ahead of time, and then they just go in and record the drums at the end, which is kind of the opposite of how drums are usually recorded. That's usually one of the first things you record, but in this case, it just makes sense to do it that way.
Right.
Yeah, oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, we recorded this album several times because there were several drum demos, several drum recordings that kept getting passed back and forth, and then several bass recordings, because initially we recorded the drums in December of 2020. We were thinking, okay, we're basically done. And then I took the files and listened back and then realized that a lot of the bass playing just did not match exactly what Sean recorded. So I went back and re-recorded the bass, and then re-recorded other elements, and then re-recorded things. It was a very inefficient way of writing. But it worked.
Where did you? So Sean, did you record the original drum demos yourself, just in your own studio space? And then where did you record the final drums?
Final drums were at the Bunker.
Oh, wow. Okay, they did an incredible job. The sonic signature of the drums is a defining feature of this album to me. They sound so fucking good, like really amazing.
Thanks, Matt. Well, we really have to give credit to Simon Grove there. I mean, the Bunker did a fantastic job. Alex, our engineer, was great there. But, once it got into Simon's hands, that's where the magic happened. So the sound of this record is thanks to Simon.
Yeah. Did he only use the recorded audio, or did he include any... like, there are times where your bass drum sounds so... like, what's the word? Like, has so much air and like boom to it. I wonder if there's samples included, or...
I didn't ask. I'm curious about that as
well, too. Yeah. We'll say that Alex at the Bunker did an insane job recording it. We spent 3 days recording just drums, which is interesting because we thought that was like, oh, that's plenty of time. But then we later learned that for the prog metal guys, they'll spend a week just recording drums for a record.
Right.
And the luxury of that, you've recorded a big band record. You spend how many days trying to record a big band record?
Yeah, like that was like 2 days
3
of
maybe
recording, and then I only had it was about the budget, It's like 2 days in the studio, and then I think it was 6 days of mixing for the whole thing, So
yeah, I mean, like the time frame that we're discovering for how metal records are made, and this is, I guess, kind of how we're like gearing or a lot of how we do the recording process, just so much longer. Which is insane to me because big band records are incredibly detailed and incredibly complicated. So
and
budget's always a concern. Yeah,
there's so much to be learned from that world of musicians. Like, one thing I've noticed is how much they take control of every element of, like, a lot of great progressive rock musicians are also great engineers and also do great editing. And they just sort of like have taken control of those so they can fiddle with it. I'm thinking of Periphery or,
of course. And a lot of that comes from, the DIY aspect of early guitar recording, people recording through the Pod HD 500, things like that. And I think about how I started doing music production, which was screwing around in Fruity Loops, FL Studio now, and also Ableton Live, and doing it very DIY that way because it gets your ears acclimated to a very different way of approaching music that over the past year and a half most of us have had to acclimate ourselves to, which is listening to ourselves on recordings and then listening to frequency instead of note.
Right.
That was a whole thing that the metal world and the electronic music world intimately knows, because that's always baked into how it works. Not so much in the jazz world. The idea of like recording and then futzing around with snare EQ for 5 hours or something like that. That's bread and butter. That's not something that jazz musicians ever do. But now they're finding it. Now it's a very important part of the process, is to have that moment where you listen to the snare for the 3,000th time and then get very frustrated. But that's a very important part of the learning process too. We did our own mixing on Sungazers Volume 1 and 2, which are our EPs, but then we knew that our ears could only take so much, and so we handed it off to Simon for this round.
Right. When it's your own music, it's really difficult to have the sort of objectivity to be able to make mixing decisions. I think even if you have the skills to do it, which, let's be honest, most of us don't, even if we're very, very good at it. Mix engineers are wizards and scientists, but even if you have those skills, you have to be able to decisively say, like, we can get rid of this, or we can change the sound drastically of the snare drum, and it's really hard to be able to do that about your own playing. And you get really attached to mistakes, and you get really attached to freaky sounds that probably aren't actually benefiting the music, but you personally really like,
Well, I mean, that's a whole thing. Is like the mix process is a creative process. And that's why Simon's our co-producer on the record, because so much of the sound and so much of how it sounds, so much of how it feels is thanks to him. And having another person involved in the creative process like that, a mix engineer is not just somebody who's like going like that, okay, it's mixed. It's every step of the way there's a creative decision being made, every step of the way. And that's often thought of as secondaries, like who are you going to get to mix the record? But it was very much like, we knew we wanted massive, awesome sounding drums, because Simon mixed Pliny's latest record and has massive, awesome sounding drums.
Yeah.
With some jazz fusion influence on there. But that's kind of that's how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a huge amount of detail in that mix. That's why he does have the co-production credit on there, because not only with the vocals and all the creative stuff he did there, but just listen to the drums. I have we have the drum stems that we can listen to the drums isolated, the mixed version, and I've been going through that recently because I've been working on the transcriptions for the album. But it's amazing what I'm hearing in there that I didn't really notice in the big picture of the mix, where he's changing the reverb, automating the length of the reverb on the snare drum differently in different sections. There's so much detail that goes into making it sound the way that it does, and it's pretty wild.
Yeah, when you start to learn about that stuff, it makes your experience as a music fan and as a listener so much more like robust. Like I remember when I first noticed in like Nevermind by Nirvana that the snare was different in the chorus than it was in the verse, and it absolutely blew my, because it was, then you start thinking about the decision-making process, and you're like, yeah, was the best decision they could have possibly made. And
we did that. We changed snares in the middle of songs. We did a bunch of that stuff like involved with it. That was actually a mind-blowing thing for me. It was like, how much snare tuning influences the feeling of groove? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like the slightest change can make the hugest difference. And so having that kind of approach versus, when you're only doing live stuff, there's so many other details to worry about rather than the tuning of a snare, but it really does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. While we're talking about production, one of the other, I think, defining sonic imprints of this record is really warped vocals. And I'm wondering what the goal and what the process was for achieving that. Maybe you guys could speak about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've always used vocal samples stuff that I'd like, and then the production stuff I've done. Having vocals, even if they're not sung, always gives it a more human, or like there's some connection to that. So like on our big hit single from the previous EP, Drunk, it's like a lot of vocal samples layered and sometimes triggered. This time there's a lot of vocal samples, but also songs sung by real human beings, but they don't sound real because they've been pitch shifted and formant shifted, which is when the vocals start sounding more like a chipmunk versus more like, I don't know, Darth Vader. That all comes from like hyperpop and PC music and Sophie and like that whole scene, which is 100 gecs, like stuff that I've like been checking out since 2019. I first kind of like discovered that then, and then
Trust Fund Ozu.
I was just about to bring up Trust Fund Ozu and her amazing stuff because I discovered Trust Fund Ozu's music through like Ben Levin, and then also Fire Tools, that whole scene. Really amazing forward-thinking musicians, and so it was just kind of natural to be like, all right, well, we're going to try and do that thing here. We've gotten a lot of the comments from people have been not a lot, but some of the comments have been they really didn't like it, but I don't know. I think it's cool. I think it's pretty sick.
I want to ask you guys just about being open-minded when approaching new kinds of music, because so earlier in the conversation you talked about the first time you heard dubstep and listening to it together in your basement and thinking how awesome it was. Back in the day, when I was that age, I was more the type of person who's like, this is bullshit. I don't recognize this, and it doesn't resonate with me because it's very unfamiliar. And I've had to learn over the years from having friends like you guys to work on that muscle of not being turned off by things that you don't recognize, of trying to listen open-mindedly to every artist's work and focus, instead of what you don't like about it, to focus on what you do like about it or what you could learn from it. And a lot of that comes from having sort of reorienting yourself. I think through working as a musician longer, you realize you have more respect for anyone who puts out anything, because you know a lot more than when you're a kid, and you realize that just to put out anything is an incredible accomplishment. But you strike me as people who are just spongy. You absorb whatever you hear, and for those of us who would like to be more like that, do you have advice?
Spongy.
More spongy, yeah.
I don't know. Try playing stuff. Try playing along to stuff, or try imitating stuff that you don't know. That's always like a mind-expanding thing, because you very quickly realize the craft that goes into things that you might initially react negatively to. Because for one of the cringiest things I've ever seen, you'll sometimes see people like make fun of pop music by writing what they consider to be a cheesy pop song to show how formulaic pop music is. And then they end up writing a really bad pop song that's not very good at all.
Right.
Kind of like in an attempt to show how easy it is to make pop music, they inadvertently make a very bad pop song, kind of proving the opposite point. So the level of craft and love that goes into things, I don't know. I guess that's a big part of being spongy, is being able to recognize quality in other things. And there's a lot of quality in other things. There's a lot of very important things that can be learned in things that don't necessarily speak to your past. Mm-hmm. But by trying to understand, you at least can try to understand where other people are coming from. Spongy is a good word. I find I like. We're both big fans, Sean and I, of the band Knower with Lewis Cole and Genevieve Vertati. Another huge influence on us. Oh my God, what they do, what Lewis Cole does, what Genevieve does is just insane. But I feel like they soak up influences and soak up things too, like a lot. Talking about the video game stuff, talking about the pop stuff, talking about like J music stuff, like that whole scene too. They're definitely influenced by that.
Yeah, and Sean, I recently met Marcus Reuter, and I know that you're learning a new instrument, and the touch guitar. Is that it in the background?
There it is. That's it.
Can I see it? It looks cool.
Yeah, it is.
And so one thing that I've been learning, that I've been forced to learn. Yeah, baby.
Yeah.
That's
pretty, huh?
Yeah. Very cool. One thing that the pandemic has forced me to learn is that being a beginner at things and learning new skills, there's a lot of translatable inspiration. Like in learning how to make videos and write scripts and edit and that kind of stuff. Now when I watch television, I'm like, wow, the framing of this shot, or wow, the color correction. And then I'm thinking, how could that be something that I could translate musically, and it's been so good for me to learn something that isn't music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you think that and for you, learning another instrument, is that influencing your drumming? And then also, because both of you are, I think it's pretty clear that my content aesthetic is basically coming from the two of you. So how does that influence your output as artists? Those sets of skills.
Well, yeah, learning touch guitar, which is the first real pitched instrument that I've taken seriously, excluding some piano lessons I had as a kid and mallet percussion in high school. But it's the first time I'm learning to play a melodic or harmonic instrument. And it's definitely, I'm sure it will have some pretty deep impact down the line on my drumming. For right now, what it's definitely done to start with is it's given me a much greater appreciation for my colleagues who play other instruments, not just guitar or bass or, but any, woodwinds. Good example. I am constantly confronted with the difficulty of playing this instrument as a beginner. That, I did go through that process as a drummer, but it was so long ago that I had forgotten it. And so it's given me a really great sense of appreciation for the work that my colleagues have put in. So I think that's the biggest influence that's had on me so far.
There's footage, I'm not sure if it'll ever see the light of day, of Sean and I switching instruments on one of the Sungazer songs. Which is very, very interesting because we know the songs. Yeah. And but to hear the recording of it is very funny because there's it's us just not having the muscle memory. The instruments don't live inside us yet. And I think that the process of learning a musical instrument is very much a process of developing muscle memory on the instrument and understanding how the body relates to it. Because you might know what the sounds are. We know what the sounds are. We intimately know what the sounds are that the other person's supposed to be making, but they aren't here yet. And that's a fun process for sure. When we're talking, going back to the idea of watching TV and then understanding aspect ratio and then understanding what kind of lens is being used in what shot, that opened my mind in so many ways from YouTube. I'm like, oh my God, this is the media I've been consuming this entire time. Look at all this stuff that's going on that the cinematographer, the director of photography was doing. And I am now sympathetic to people who are approaching music for the first time, learning music theory and language of music, where they've been listening to music their whole life and it's a big part of them, the same way that movies are a big part of us. But then you turn on a switch and now you start looking at it from the technical perspective, and then you realize that there's all this stuff behind the curtain that just you had no idea and is blowing your mind. And it's, you know, with any craft, it's like that. And that's a very interesting and beautiful thing. That hasn't changed how I relate to movies and TV and cinema. I still like the same things, but it's just like, wow, there was all this the whole time.
Right.
That's cool.
Right. And I also think for me personally, it's really important to have that humbling experience, especially when you've been developing a craft for a very long time, like your main instrument, because you can forget how to be humble, I guess. I mean, I try and be humble regardless, but I think there's something about facing that reality of doing something that you can't, that is just a really good reminder. And that's kind of appeared in different ways in my life, whether it was like learning how to use Ableton from scratch by watching YouTube videos, or, you know, learning how to play touch guitar, or, you know, learning to speak another language. Like, you know, I've been living in Berlin the last 3 years, and I showed up with no German skill at all. And, you know, now I can get by. So it's, I think, a really healthy thing to have that beginner's perspective alongside the more experienced perspective of the main instrument.
Right. And so I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time. I'm cognizant of the
No, we want this content to be as good as possible, man. We want to give you what you need to tell a story on YouTube. We're with you. Yeah.
So I just want to end again by sort of highlighting the fact that you guys are independent artists, and because of that fact, you have to have accumulated a lot of skills. And I think that because I'm just thinking about the young people that watch all of our videos and what would be valuable for them to know. And I think that that you guys both are an example of how, as an independent artist, I mean, Adam, when you were talking about watching TV or watching movies, I was thinking about the fact that, like, recently I've been thinking about getting rid of my Netflix and getting rid of my Hulu, because every time at the end of the day, I take out my iPad and I'm about to watch something, I always go to YouTube now, because I think that the independent creators don't have limitations. And so their content is fascinating to me. And I think it's the same way with your guys' music. I just can't imagine a world where, music that's in 1916 and has a bunch of nested crazy tuplets and, is getting hundreds of thousands of streams and is extremely popular, and so I wonder if you guys could just finish on a note about how being independent allows you to do what you are feeling and what is important to you.
Well, I think the reason why Threshold, this 19-tuplet explosion, was popular and is popular, is because there's a story, I think, that we can help tell through it. We like to talk about our own music. Who doesn't? But sometimes it can be difficult to relate to ideas or things that people aren't familiar with. But one of the things that we did with the live performances and the community that's built around is counting to 4 together. And then it becomes a story. And then it becomes a thing that's collaborative and something that you're really engaging the audience with, rather than, here is my music, adulate me because I make the most complicated stuff around that you can't understand, and therefore it must be important. That's something that is, I think, important for me personally, is to be able to share the joy that I feel about the music that we make with as many people as possible. And because we are independent, it's very easy. There's no the mechanism is very much like, all right, make a YouTube video, get the thumbnail right, get the title right, boom. Something that I've been doing for 15 years. And that I think is a very cool and very special thing, that a very exciting thing for us to be able to do. But story is a big part of it. Story of the music. Telling a story on a YouTube video, as you know, is very important, like setting it up, treating it almost like journalism. So we're creating our own music journalism around our own music, which is powerful. It's unique, and it's something that I don't think I don't really want to take for granted. But that's kind of what we're doing.
It strikes me, I think, that having developed an audience who will go with you on this journey. And I think it appears to me, and I've noticed this in my own career too, ever since I started basically engaging with telling stories around the music via social media, that people are going to be there for you and not for... A lot of comments I get are like, I wouldn't really ever listen to this, or this doesn't really appeal to me, but it's cool. And, I feel like that might be true for you guys, that you have a freedom as artists to do really whatever you're feeling, because your audience is there for you and not for the music. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that freedom.
Hopefully both, yeah. Hopefully both, I would say. But yes. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that freedom is huge. I mean, I can't imagine making this record with a bunch of executives from a label breathing down our neck. Do you guys sure you need 19 notes in that beat? I think a few less might be enough. It just would never work. So it's not only really helpful to be independent, it's also a necessity for a project like this.
Well, guys, congrats.
And thankfully, we've got the machine to make it work online.
Yeah. Well, anyways, again, I just want to say congratulations. It's very clear to me how much work went into this record, and it's, beyond all of its complexities and all of its experimentation and daring, it's just really fun to listen to. I listened to it on the airplane the day it came out in my AirPods, and the first thing I thought was like, I need to buy the lossless version of this so I can listen to it in my nice headphones. It's a huge accomplishment. I'm really proud of you guys, and thank you again for your time.